everyone. Can everyone hear me back there? Okay. My name is Anne Marie Safai. I am the Vice Regent of the Captain Joe Knapp chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. On behalf of my chapter, the Douglas VFW Post 7554, Joseph J. Mitchner Post in the Douglas Fire Department, welcome to our Vietnam War Veterans Commemorative Flag Ceremony. We gather today to thank and honor our veterans of the Vietnam War for their service and sacrifice on behalf of the United States of America, and to thank and honor the families of these veterans. We honor our veterans today with a Vietnam War commemorative flag that was designed to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. The phrase, "A grateful nation thanks and honors you," graces the flag. It is a reminder to all Vietnam veterans that their sacrifices are not forgotten. Please rise for the invocation by Pastor Tony Matchek and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and National Anthem. Pastor Matchek.
And a few thoughts with you, and then we'll pray. God's blessing. From Ecclesiastes chapter 3. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant, a time to uproot. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build. A time to weep and a time to laugh. A time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, time for war and a time for peace. That last line can be hard to swallow. How can there be a purpose for war? We all want peace. One entity pits itself against another. There has to be a winner. There has to be a loser. For those who carry out faithfully the missions and the orders, Lord, those are the ones that we are here to honor today for their faithfulness to the mission and to the duty. There are things that remain. There are no winners and losers among those who do the fighting. Only scars remain. Only scars remain for those who come back. There's a stone monument in Washington with some 58,000 scars on it to commemorate those who did not return. Those who do return, these are some words from a song that I like and enjoy often. Scars are souvenirs we never lose. The past is never far. Those who returned bear scars, some in body, some in soul, some in family, some that we cannot even understand. But there is a time to heal, time to mend, and we are in that time. And this event today can close wounds and turn them into scars. So we are here to honor those today who were faithful in duty, who did return, who were faithful in their service, in their valor, and in their sacrifice. Thank you. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for this opportunity to come invite your presence to speak to our hearts through the words of others and through your holy word. We thank you for this time together. Bless it. May it be a godly and holy event. Amen.
And now for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now I'd like Rebecca Rockney to come forward to sing the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you say, by the dawn's early light, what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets crackle, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the hope of the brave?
Thank you, Rebecca. You may be seated, those who have chairs. There are some more chairs in the front here. Next, I would like to recognize our distinguished guests in the audience. First, I would like to introduce Marcy Karagosian, our former state DAR regent. Next, I would like to recognize the Boy Scout Troop 134 that is attending our event today. I also would like to introduce Bruce Ware. He is the outreach specialist at the Worcester Vet Center. Where's Bruce? There's Bruce there. Thank you, Bruce. I also would like to recognize John Zifkat from the Douglas VFW, who's been so helpful with this program today. Thank you, John. And also thanks to Leon Sosha for joining us today, and he will be assisting us with the flag raising. Thank you. Now I would like to introduce Senator Ryan Fatman, who's here to say a few words.
Thank you, Anne-Marie, and good afternoon, everyone. It's my honor to be able to speak with you very briefly this afternoon in such a memorable way for those who came back at the end of the Vietnam War and remember how they were treated. Today, we correct some of that. We'll never be able to fully say that we're appreciative for what was happening at that time. But today, in a small, finite way, we are able to take a step in the right direction. My colleague, Representative Joe McKenna, unfortunately couldn't join us here today. But if he were here, he wanted to just express his thanks as well. And from both of us, we wanted to thank the community for coming out. Today we're joined by many veterans, and just very briefly, I'd like them to extend a hand and identify themselves, and if we could give them a round of applause. I'd also like to thank the Daughters of the American Revolution, the VFW post in Douglas, our Chief Vincent and Chief Foley for helping make this happen. If we look to the answer as to why for so many years we achieved so much as a nation, prospered as no other people on earth, it is because of those who are willing to sacrifice their lives and travel to foreign lands and give up their very being for our nation. In order to know where we are going, we must remember where we have been. We have been through many wars, and none that were fought like Vietnam. And today, ultimately, we have this wonderful ability to say thank you for all those who served us. I'm reminded in our nation, in our founding, in our principles, in the book of Luke, in the Bible, there's a parable about a man building a house. He said, there was a man building a house who laid the foundation deep, that when the storms came and the winds blew, that house could not be shaken, for it was well built. Well, our nation is very similar. It is built on a foundation that is very deep, and it was built by those who sacrificed so much for us. So I have the great opportunity today, as your state senator, to say thank you. Thank you for coming out, for participating in this, and for remembering that we have so much to be thankful for those who gave so much. Thank you.
Next, I would like to introduce Fire Chief Kent Vincent of the Douglas Fire Department, who so kindly co-sponsored our event today. Introduce Chief Henry.
Thank you everyone for coming today. I want to thank Linda Ballou for reaching out to us. It's truly our honor with the Douglas Fire Department to have this flag ceremony held on our grounds and using our flagpole. We certainly appreciate that, and we certainly appreciate the hard work and dedication of those who've served in the Vietnam War and all veterans. So thank you for coming. God bless all of you.
Now I would like to introduce Linda Ballou from our DAR chapter. Linda organized this entire special event today and did a fine job at it. Please give her a round of applause.
Hi everybody, I'm going to make this really brief because it's very windy out here. The U.S. Department of Defense has sent a lot of Vietnam veteran pins to us to give out to the Vietnam veterans. So for those of you that I haven't seen yet, please come see me after the ceremony. I have them, you earned them, you deserve them, so let me give them to you after the ceremony. Right now I'm going to give you a very, very brief history lesson on Vietnam, but actually Vietnam between World War II and the start of the Vietnam War. At the beginning of World War II, Vietnam was part of French Indochina. So there was North Vietnam, South Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. They all were part of Indochina. When the French fell to the Germans in 1941, they were no longer able to protect their colonies. So Japan very nicely took over. They allowed North Vietnam to stay. Their leader was kind of a puppet of Japan, and but they basically took over. And then in 1945, Japan just simply overthrew them. When Japan was defeated at the end of World War II, France tried to get back their Indochina colonies. They were soundly defeated. So in 1954, there was a Geneva Conference which said Cambodia and Laos are going to be their own countries. They're going to be independent countries. North Vietnam, South Vietnam, going to be divided at the 17th parallel. That was only supposed to be temporary. They were supposed to hold elections to determine the fate of their country. North Vietnam was very much an aggressor. It was a communist-leaning nation. They wanted very much to patent their country after the communist nations of the Soviet Union and China. South Vietnam leaned more towards the West. So between 54 and the start of the Vietnam War, the United States poured lots of money into South Vietnam. they were pouring money in to pay the South Vietnam military. But North Vietnam was not happy. They wanted to continue their aggressive movements into the South, and they continued to do so. They, at the same time, the leader in South Vietnam was not a popular leader. He was a Catholic leader. His country was Buddhist. He discriminated against the Buddhists. He made a lot of people unhappy. There were a lot of dissidents in South Vietnam. They were fighters. They were revolutionaries. They were called the Viet Cong. The army from North Vietnam, the North Vietnam Army. So this whole deal, it gradually escalated under, first of all, President Eisenhower, then President Kennedy. Kennedy was 61 to 63. When he was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson took over. About this time, there was an incident in the Bay of Tonkin. Now, North Vietnam at one point was called Tonkin. So you know that the Bay of Tonkin is right up there in North Vietnam territory. They attacked the USS Maddox. Another destroyer came to protect the USS Maddox and was reported that they were also attacked. There's a little bit of disagreement about that as to whether they were attacked or whether they thought they were attacked, but nevertheless, Congress hurried up and passed a resolution called, I believe it was the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which gave Lyndon Johnson broad powers to escalate the war. Now this is 1964. 1964, there were about 23,000 U.S. military people there. And this is where I'm going to stop my story, because Bill Audette, who I'm going to introduce next, he is the commandant of the Blackstone Valley Marine Corps, number 911, and he's going to continue this. And I tried to make this as brief as possible, too brief probably, so it's probably half wrong. But anyway, here's Bill Audette, another Vietnam veteran.
Well, Linda, I think you were right on. I think she memorized all that. It's amazing. Thank you. Oh, I'm not done yet. Far from it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, fellow veterans. I want to thank the Captain Job Knapp chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. I want to thank the fire department here in Douglas and the Douglas VFW for hosting this event. Today is National Vietnam Veterans Recognition Day. I want to thank you, members of the DA Bar, for remembering the Vietnam veteran, especially on this, the 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War. As Linda said, on August 2nd and 4th, 1964, North Vietnamese troops fired upon 2 United States warships that were in the Gulf of Tonkin. As she described, it eventually became the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution. On March 8th, 1965, members of the 9th U.S. Marine Expeditionary Force go ashore at Da Nang, South Vietnam. The Marines were ordered into Da Nang to beef up defense of the air base nearby, from which air strikes against North Vietnam targets had been launched. The 3,500 Marines dispatched on March 8, 1965, marked the start of the ground war in Vietnam. There were many battles between 1965 and 1973. Some that come to mind are the Battle of the Ap Bac in January of 1962, the Battle of the Ai Drang Valley on October 26th and November 27th, 1965, the Battle of Khe Sanh from January 21 to April 9th, 1968, and the Tet Offensive from January 30th to March 28th, 1968. The Battle of Hamburger Hill, May 10th to 20th, 1969. The Easter Offensive, March 30th to October 22nd, 1972. The Battle of Jean Lac, April 9th to the 20th, 1975. And the Fall of Saigon. This is just to name a few. Veterans, men and women from every branch of the service served in Vietnam. The Navy, Marines, Army, Air Force, and the Coast Guard. Wherever we talk about those who served in Vietnam, we need to remember a very, very special group of people. Those are what we used to call the angels of Vietnam, or the many nurses that served over there that cared for our dying and wounded. They have a special place in the hearts of all Vietnam veterans. Let me direct my comments right now to a special group of men and women. These would be our Vietnam era veterans. Did I lose something? No, these veterans did not serve in Vietnam. Theirs was a very important job nonetheless. You were our backbone, our support. If it weren't for you men and women doing your jobs, we couldn't have done ours in the Nam. You have served your country honorably. You can hold your heads up high. You did your job well. There is a long-standing tradition that started with the Vietnam War. It says that whenever a Vietnam veteran greets another Vietnam veteran, he says, "Welcome home." So today I say to all of my brother and sister Vietnam veterans, welcome home. What is a Vietnam veteran? The following is written by a Vietnam veteran in a college assignment by one of his professors. This is what he wrote. Vietnam veterans are men and women. We are dead or alive, whole or maimed, sane or haunted. We grew from our experiences, or we were destroyed by them, or we struggled to find some place in between. We lived through hell, or we had a pleasant if scary adventure. We were Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force, Coast Guard, Red Cross, and civilians of all sorts. Some of us enlisted to fight for God and country, and some were drafted. Some were gung-ho, and some were kicking and screaming. Like veterans of all wars, we lived a tad bit, or a great bit, closer to death than most people like to think about. If Vietnam vets differ from others, perhaps it is primarily in the fact that many of us never saw the enemy or recognized him or her. We heard gunfire and mortar fire, but rarely looked into enemy eyes. Those who did, like folks who encounter close combat anywhere and any time, are often haunted for life by those eyes, those sounds, those electric fears that ran between ourselves, our enemies, and the likelihood of death for one of us. Or we get hard, calloused, and tough, all in a day's work. Life's a bitch, then you die. But most of us remember and get twitchy, worried, and then sad. We are crazies, dressed in camo, wide-eyed, wary, homeless, and drunk. We are Brooks Brothers suit wearers doing deals downtown. We are housewives, grandmothers, and church deacons. We are college professors engaged in the rational pursuit of the truth about the history or politics or culture of the Vietnam experience. And we are sleepless, often sleepless. We pushed paper, we pushed shovels. We drove jeeps, operated bulldozers, built bridges. We toted machine guns through dense brush, deep paddy, and thorn scrub. We lived on buffalo milk, fresh heads, fish heads, and rice, or sea rations, or steaks and Budweiser. We did our time in high mountains drenched by endless monsoon rains, or on the dry plains, or on muddy rivers, or at the most beautiful beaches in the world. We wore berets, bandanas, flop hats, and steel pots, flak jackets, canvas, rash, and rot. We ate chloroquine and got malaria anyway. We got shots constantly but have diseases nobody can diagnose. We spent our nights on cots or shivering in foxholes filled with waist-high water, or lying still on cold, wet ground, our eyes imagining Charlie behind every bamboo blade. Or we slept in hotel beds in Saigon or barracks in Thailand, or in cramped ships berths at sea. We feared we would die, or we feared we would kill. We simply feared, and often we still do. We hate the war, or believe it was the best thing that ever happened to us. We blame Uncle Sam or Uncle Ho and their minions and secretaries and apologists for every wart or cough or tick of an eye. We wonder if Agent Orange got us. Mostly, and this I believe with all my heart, mostly we wish we had been so alone. Some of us went with units, but many, probably most of us, were civilians one day, jerked up out of the world, shaved, barked at, insulted, humiliated, de-egotized, and taught to kill or fix radios or to drive trucks. We went, put in our time, and were equally ungraciously plucked out of the morass and placed back in the real world. But now we smoke dope, shot skag, and drank heavily. Our wives or husbands seemed distant and strange. Our friends wanted to know if we shot anybody. And life went on. Had been going on as if we hadn't been there, as if Vietnam was a topic of political conversation or college protest or news copy, not a matter of life and death for tens of thousands. Vietnam vets are people just like you. We served our country proudly or reluctantly or ambivalently. What makes us different, what makes us Vietnam vets, is something we understand, but we are afraid nobody else will. But we appreciate your asking. Vietnam veterans are white, black, beige, and shades of gray. But in comparison with our numbers in the real world, we were more likely black. Our ancestors came from Africa, from Europe, or China, or they crossed the Bering Sea land bridge in the last ice age and formed the nations of American Indians, built pyramids in Mexico, or farmed acres of corn on the banks of the Chesapeake Bay. We had names like Rodriguez and Stein and Smith and Kalowski. We were Americans, Australians, Canadians, Koreans. Most Vietnam veterans are Vietnamese. We were farmers, students, mechanics, steel workers, nurses, and priests when the call came that changed us all forever. We had dreams and plans, and they all had to change or wait. We were daughters and sons, lovers and poets, beatniks and philosophers, convicts and lawyers. We were rich and poor, but mostly poor. We were educated or not, mostly not. We grew up in slums, in shacks, in duplexes and bungalows, in houseboats and hooches and ranches. We were cowards and heroes. Sometimes we were cowards one moment and heroes the next. Many of us have never seen Vietnam. We waited at home for those we loved, and for some of us our worst fears were realized. For others our loved ones came back, but never would be the same. We came home and marched in protest marches, sucked in tear gas and shrieked our anger and horror for all to hear. Or we sat alone in small rooms in VA hospital wards, in places where only the crazy ever go. We are Republicans, Democrats, Socialists and Confucians, and Buddhists and atheists. Though as usually is the case, even the atheists among us sometimes pray to get out of there alive. We are hungry and we are sated, full of life or clinging to death. We are injured and we are curers, despairing and hopeful, loved or lost. We got too old too quickly, but some of us have never grown up. We want desperately to go back, to heal wounds, revisit the sites of our horror. Or we want never to see that place again, to bury it, its memories, its meaning. We want to forget, and we wish we could remember. Despite our differences, we have so much in common. There are a few of us who don't know how to cry, though we often do it alone when nobody will ask, what's wrong? We're afraid we might have to answer. If you want to know what a Vietnam veteran is, get in your car or get a friend in a car and drive. Go to Washington, go to the wall. There will be Vietnam veterans there. Watch us, listen to us, go touch the wall. Rejoice a bit, cry a bit. No, cry a lot. I'm a Vietnam veteran, and after 30 years, I think I'm beginning to understand what that means. That was written by a Vietnam veteran. There isn't too much I can say about Nam that hasn't already been said, and that you probably already have heard. We remember. Vietnam veterans remember. We remember almost every day since we rode that Freedom Bird home. We remember Charlie, C-rats or canned meals for use in the field. Each usually consisted of a can of some basic course, a can of fruit, a packet of some type of dessert, a packet of powdered cocoa, sugar, powdered cream, coffee, a small pack of cigarettes, 2 pieces of chewing gum, and toilet paper. Everyone wanted the pound cake. We remember words like boonies, DMZ, friendly fire, grunt, M14, M16, quad 50s, rice patties, hooch, NVA, Tet, Viet Cong, Diddy Mao, Dinky Dow, Buku, No Combiet, Mama San, Papa San. Number 1, short timer, the world. We remember the heat. We can never forget the heat when we first flew into Da Nang Air Base, whatever base you flew into, and they opened the back of that plane and the heat hit you. You can never forget that. The elephant grass and the monsoons, the red clay that covered our clothing and our boots. The smell of diesel fuel, the sound of Huey, Spooky or Puff the Magic Dragon doing his thing. We remember the new guy, the short timer, and those distinctive smells coming from the local Ville. We remember those long, long, dark nights. We remember Saigon, Da Nang, Phu-Bai, Ton Son-Nhut, Quang Tri, Khe Sanh, and An Hoa. Liberty Bridge, Red China Sea, China Beach, Dong Ha, the Mekong Delta, Dodge City, Freedom Hill, Hill 10, Hill 65, Geo Lin, Highway 1, the Rock Pile, the A Shaw Valley, and so many more. We remember sounds of shells going overhead that were just fired from the New Jersey, or aircraft flying over from the aircraft carrier, the Intrepid. All military involvement in Vietnam ended on August 15, 1973. The official end of the war ended in April of 1975 with the evacuation of the United States Embassy in Saigon. We also cannot forget the evacuation of Koh Tang Island off the coast of South Vietnam. For those of us that have been in the Nam, or boots on the ground, there are no words to describe what our tour of duty was like. Each individual soldier, sailor, Marine, Airman, or Coast Guardsman knows what the Nam was like. Ask them to describe their tour, and you'll probably be greeted by a very, very long stare. It is not something likely to draw a conversation. The one constant that you'll hear is that only those that have had boots on the ground can actually talk about the Nam. And that conversation is with another Vietnam veteran. There are presently 1,622 soldiers listed as missing in action from Vietnam, Cambodia, or Laos. Of that 1,622, 961 remains have been identified since 1975. Massachusetts has 39 still listed as missing in Southeast Asia. The closest missing American is from the next town over Sutton, John Henn. Presently, there are 58,178 names on the Vietnam Memorial in Washington, D.C. If there is one thing that is dear in the heart of every Vietnam veteran, is that we will always remember our POWs and our MIAs. Always. We never forget. And we will be sure that all of America never forgets. 9,087,000 military personnel served on active duty during the Vietnam era, from August 65 to May 1975. 3,403,100, including 514,300 offshore personnel served in the Southeast Asia theater, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, flight crews based in Thailand, and sailors in adjacent South China Sea waters. 2,594,000 personnel served within the borders of South Vietnam from January 1965 to March 1973. Another 50,000 men served in Vietnam between 1960 and 1964. 7,484 women served in Vietnam, of whom 6,250, or 83%, were nurses. Many of the wounds from Vietnam are those that we can see in our disabled veterans. But there are those wounds that one cannot see. Those wounds are described as PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. During World War II, it was known as shell shock. In Korea, it was known as battle fatigue. It is estimated that more than 283,000 Vietnam veterans, men, and a few hundred women, now beyond the age of retirement, still suffer post-traumatic stress syndrome from their experiences in Southeast Asia. Thanks to agencies such as the Worcester Vet Center, many of us are getting the treatment and counseling that we need. On June 8, 1972, in Trang Bang, a small village in Vietnam, South Vietnamese planes were mistakenly dropped napalm on a Buddhist pagoda in an area where the North Vietnamese were infiltrating. While running for safety with other children, Kim Phuc, aged 9, was severely burned by napalm. Most of us remember that photograph of Kim Phuc. Several years ago, I contacted that young girl, now a grown woman. I felt a connection to Kim and what the Vietnam War had done to so many Vietnam veterans as well as the people of Vietnam. I told her that I was sorry for what had happened to her and added that I hoped she had peace in her life. Kim answered by saying, "God bless your heart. I just wanted you to pray for me that I have enough strength every day so I could bear the pain, and my family also. Thank God for a miracle in my life. God bless Kim." I received 2 letters recently in the mail that I'd like to read to you. It's from a husband and wife. I'm going to read the first one from the wife. "For the last 46 years, I have been the wife of a former Marine and a Vietnam veteran. When he was asked to write his thoughts about the war, both then and now, I warned my sister that emotionally he would not be able to go to sleep. So I'm going to fill in the gaps in his history, which has always been our story. We were kids together. In 4th grade, I went to play at his house with his sister. I was introduced to him as, 'This is my big brother Stephen.' Her love and pride in him were obvious. When he reacted with what I thought was pretty dismissive behavior toward her, I thought he was a bit of a jerk. However, the next time I saw them together, he and her by the hand, and they were running for the school bus. She was not the runner that he was, and was sure to miss the bus, but he would not leave her behind. As he ran with her, he seemed to transfer some of his energy to her, as she was able to run fast enough that they did not miss the bus. Fast forward. We had been going steady for 2.5 years by the time his high school graduation was due to roll around. That's when he told me he had joined the Marines. I wasn't terribly happy about the idea, but as a Mayflower descendant whose family roots were deeply patriotic, I couldn't fault him for choosing to serve. Former graduates had already been sent over to Vietnam, and 2 had already lost their lives in that conflict. I was worried. After he completed boot camp, he had orders to go to Pensacola for additional training. I wondered what that was going to mean, but was glad when he was over, not going directly to Vietnam. Toward the end of his training, due to his specialty, he actually had something of a choice in where he could be sent. Since his father was deceased and he was the only son, he could not have opted out of Vietnam. He refused to do so. When he got his orders off to Vietnam, he went, a kid of 19. I wrote letters to him every single day. I often did not hear back from him for weeks on end. I saw the images on the news every night. He promised me he would come back, but I still worried that he would come back in a flag-draped coffin instead of coming back alive. I was able to meet him on his R&R in Hawaii. He gave me an engagement ring on the beach at dawn that first morning. It was July 4th, and at sundown, the fireworks started. When he dove for cover as they started, I got a glimpse of what he had been facing was doing to him. He had never been nervous before. He told me a good friend of ours had just been killed over there, and once again promised me he would survive the conflict. We planned to marry. He came home not long after, before I graduated from high school. I was so happy to have him home, yet I could see some changes in him that were disconcerting. He angered easily, he was edgy, he just did not seem quite himself. Shortly after we married, I realized he was now plagued by nightmares. Night after night they came, kicking, hitting, yelling while asleep, sweating. And when I would ask what the nightmare was, he could not tell me. He started college on the GI Bill. There were lots of Vietnam vets there with us, but they couldn't seem to talk to each other about what they had been involved in. The cigarette smoking accelerated, the nightmares continued, and then the drinking began in earnest. Since that time, the drinking has stopped, the cigarette smoking is down to nearly nothing, but the nightmares, they continue. Not as often now, but they are still there. He has survived, and his emotional pain has lessened some. I look at our 19-year-old grandson and think no one should go through what he did at that age. He isn't the bitter one, I am. He says he would do it again, and I say in return, if I had it within my power to stop him, even if it meant he would never speak to me again, so be it. I would not let him make the same choice again. It took too much from him, from me, and from our daughter. No, returning to be spit on, called baby killer, being called crazy and discriminated against by employers, to then be forgotten because of the country's embarrassment over a lost war, no, never again. And that's from the wife. I have the one that Stephen wrote. I have been asked to put down my thoughts about the Vietnam War then and now. I have found it is not as easy as it sounds, but I will try and hope it doesn't sound like rambling of an old man, for it is difficult to explain being in a war to those who have not been there. I joined the Marine Corps when I was 18 years old in 1967 with the full knowledge that I might have to go to war. At the time, my choice was not the popular view for most of my generation, but I believed I had an obligation to serve my country, and I felt the Marines were the best choice to make. I went through basic training, then received my orders to report to Florida for more training after that. I was a little surprised at that, as a lot of other guys got orders to Vietnam. My training lasted about 10 months in Florida, and then I waited for about a month for my new orders to come in. There was many different places I could have been posted, so I did not know what to expect. I received my orders to report to a staging battalion at Camp Pendleton, then to report to Subunit 1 in Da Nang in the Republic of South Vietnam. I was going to war. I called my girlfriend in California and told her I was being sent to Vietnam, and she cried. At that time, images of the war was being broadcast on the nightly news with pictures of body bags, wounded soldiers, and a running count of the dead from the fighting every night. It was the first time that the American public was actually exposed to the horrors of war every day. I told my girlfriend that I would be all right, and this is what all my training was about. I was 19 and still an innocent. That would change. I would change, and my relationship with the rest of America would change. War is hell. I went home on leave before going over to Vietnam, and that is when I told my mother where I was going next. She started to cry and then told me she was going to contact our congressman to get my orders changed because I was the only son of my family and should not have to go to war. I told her not to because I was a Marine and I went to where I was sent, and that I would never forgive her if she did. As I have said above, I was innocent and young. I cannot speak about my job was over because of security issues which still apply to this day. But I can say some things about my feelings about the war, the protesters, my country, and the politicians at the time. When I first arrived in country, it was all about country, honor, and corps. When I left, it was about staying alive, protecting the man next to me, and being able to get back to the world. It was not that I did not believe in America anymore. It was the fact that I had lost faith in the leaders we had and with the American people. I was here serving my country, fighting in a war that was unpopular, and doing what I thought was what every American was supposed to do: support the country and the men and the women that served. The media was bombarding the country with images of war and saying how inept we were at fighting it. When our hands were tied by the politicians, they thought they could fight the war from Washington better than us who were there. There were many demonstrations against the war that were supposed to be for peace, and the demonstrators were blaming us who were there for the war. We were serving our country and protecting their rights to protest. The targets of their protest were wrong. Their protest should not have been against those of us that were serving, but against those who were making a profit from our service, whether it was monetary or political graft. Was our involvement in Vietnam politically correct or not? I don't know. I do know that with the job I had, I was helping save the lives of other Marines and soldiers, and that was enough for me. I harbor no ill will against the protesters, the draft dodgers, or the ones that left the country to avoid serving. It was a difficult time for all of us, and we all had to make choices and live with the choices we made. Nowadays, when people find out I am a vet, they thank me for my service. I am honored that they do so, but I also tell them that it was my duty to serve, my honor to serve. Who knows, maybe some of that innocence is still alive. We who served in Vietnam have a little saying. We all gave some, and some gave their all. I am proud of my service to my country, and if I asked, would do it again, even knowing what I know now. I hope this will help give some insight into the way a lot of men and women felt and feel about our service in Vietnam. For a long time after I returned home, I was cynical about a lot of things, and then, as I said, I lost faith in my country, but most of all, I lost faith in myself. My feelings still run very deep, and there is so much more to say, but no way to say it. I will say that time has a way of healing old wounds. If not healing, then at least tempering them. There are some things that can be forgiven and some not, but nothing will ever be forgotten. Semper Fi, Stephen. In closing, let me quote what President Ronald Reagan said at the Tomb of the Unknowns in Arlington regarding the Vietnam War. He said, "We write no last chapters, we close no books, we put away no final memories." May God bless all of the men and women of our armed forces, and especially those that are in harm's way. Now to my brother and sister, non-vets, may God bless you. May the peace of God also give you peace in your hearts and in your mind. God bless these great United States of America. Thank you. I've got the Vietnam commemorative flag. I'm going to walk around in a circle. I'm going to ask each Vietnam veteran to touch the flag before it's raised.
McLaughlin for performing taps. Thank you once again to all of you for joining us today. Please join us for refreshments inside the firehouse. Thank you.
You guys nice and warm?